Hello and welcome. I am delighted that you are here on this cold evening. Before I have Siobhan come up, I want to make sure, I think most of you already know, but you know, when we had our November meeting, we had a little glitch with our video, so we only got the first part of Ina's talk about her grandfather. And so what we did was we had Ina come to my house and I interviewed her. So we've got more actually than she told us as at the meeting. And it is now posted on YouTube. So if you want to see a little bit more of Ina's recollections of her grandfather, it's on our YouTube. Siobhan, I think, without further ado, I need you to come up. And introduce our speaker.
This is just such a unique and special treat tonight. We have Jeff Lapidus coming up from Sierra Madre, which is down by Pasadena. He and his wife drove up this afternoon. And he is a Southern California photographer and book designer. And they actually live in Sierra Madre, and he has designed the deluxe centennial books for Sierra Madre and San Marino. He is a fantastic storyteller. I think it requires a unique eye to see things with a photographer's eye, but it is even more unique to couple it with a great story. And Jeff has done a wonderful job in his book. The book is for sale for $40, contrary to my error in the posting. It's not $35, it's $40. But it is a delightful book. It's well done. I just cannot tell you how excited we are to have you, Jeff. And I will let you go through and explain what you're going to talk to us about.
All right, thank you very much, Siobhan.
Do I need to lower the light level?
Yes, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Fantastic. That's great.
Sufficient?
Good for me.
How about you in the back?
That's perfect. Yeah.
It's okay.
No glare in the eyes or anything? All right. Thank you, Siobhan. You've been very gracious. It's been wonderful coming up here. The weather is fine for us. It's okay. And not as windy as they predicted, so it's good. So what is this story? I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory. That I designed a book for John Robinson, who was the #1 historian and author about the mountains in Southern California. And he did his magnum opus. Took him 14 years to put it together, a book on all the ways by land you could get to Los Angeles throughout history, from Indian paths to railroads to interstates, everything. But in that book that I designed and put together, there were some photographs by what apparently was a French photographer named Rudolf de Reus. And they were all taken in 1863, and it just piqued my interest as a photographer. Who was this guy going through in the middle of nowhere taking pictures of a whole lot of stuff? So years went by. I put the idea behind, in the back burner, and then I spent 3 years doing research to determine who this person was and what he had to go through to do what he did. So I call this Passage to El Dorado because El Dorado has a few meanings. One is riches, one is just the dreams fulfilled for people, or the yearning for those fulfilled dreams. But there's an actual place called El Dorado Canyon in today's southern Nevada. And it was the home hotbed of mining for gold and silver, and if that ran out, copper. Oop. There we go. Now, this doesn't look much like the Mojave Road, but this is the hometown of our photographer. And no, it's not in France. It's in Bernau by Berlin, nearby Berlin. And this illustration is from the year he was born, which is 1823, a parade going down Main Street of his town. Now, this was in Prussia, which was a part of, it's pre-Germany, but there was an amalgam of German republics that got together. But in 1848, when he was in his early 20s, Europe was a hotbed of revolution. Every place you see red and yellow, there was some violence going on. It led to the dethroning of some kings. But just in the German Confederation, in the red outline, there were seven different insurrections in 1848. So I think our Rudolph de Roos said, you know what? I think I can have a better future for myself getting the heck out of here. And he came to us. New York City, 1848. And this is a view from Brooklyn looking at Manhattan. That's Manhattan here. That's New Jersey back there. And that's more of Brooklyn. Brooklyn just comes around like that. And that was the world that he entered in 1848. Something happened a year later, minor little occurrence in the world. Gold was found in California. So if you're sitting in New York City, how do you get to the gold fields? You had to get to San Francisco. And the way you could get there was 3 different routes, and the route he took was considered the best route, which is by going through Panama, pre-canal, no canal. And it was a horrible trip. You'd have to pick up a ship, besides from New York going down to the northern part of the isthmus, you then have to get a ragtag, lousy boat down the Chagres River until you could go no farther, and then after that 20 more miles to get to the Pacific Ocean on muleback. When you got down to Panama, the Pacific coast of Panama, you could wait up to 3 weeks to get a paddle steamer that'll get you all the way up to San Francisco.
Jeff, before you continue, Matt, is he in your camera view?
Pardon?
Is he?
Oh, do I have to stay back here?
No, it doesn't make a difference because I can't see it.
All right.
No, go ahead.
So this is a map of the time of what it took to cross the Panama Canal River to last 20 miles, getting to Panama City, and that's where you would wait for a boat. Thousands of people did this. This is an amalgam of all the trials and tribulations people went through, because going through the jungles of Panama meant you were exposed to yellow fever, malaria, and dysentery. Families would go, and the kids would be born on the backs of the Indians, the local Indians. And this was a very hazardous route to go, but it was the best of the 3 ways to get to San Francisco from the East Coast. Et voila, finally, Rudolph arrives in San Francisco in 1849 in March. So many people wanted to get to San Francisco, to get to the gold fields, that ships would come into harbor, and the crew of the ships, the crews, and even the captains would abandon the ships in the harbor because they said, the heck with being on the high seas, we want to go find our fortune in the gold fields. The harbor got so packed with ships that they were bumper to bumper, and you could walk across the harbor, walking on ship after ship after ship. It became such a nuisance, it brought the harbor to a standstill, that the city fathers of San Francisco said, anybody can go out there and start chopping up the wood for building materials for their homes on land. Why am I showing a map of the city of New York again? It's because we don't know how well things panned out for Rudolph and the California Gold Rush, but evidently not good enough. But he came back to New York City, and in 1855 he became a naturalized citizen. But he had happy feet, and he had to go through Panama again, but something major had developed in Panama. There was now a railroad. So it wasn't nearly as hazardous or lengthy as before. So he came over to California again. He decided to become an engineer, a mining engineer. And he was in, let me do that again. And he ended up in Butte and Yuba counties. Butte and Yuba counties. Became a quartz miner and went bankrupt. So he said, what am I supposed to do now? He actually ventured up to British Columbia, to Victoria on Vancouver Island, and he set up shop as an architect. But the local powers said, you know what, we need a new map and a new survey of our little space on the island. So he was commissioned to do this map. So now there's Rudolph DeRuse. We're talking about, and he signs this as a civil engineer, CE. So we have Rudolph DeRuse is now a cartographer, a surveyor, a miner, and a civil engineer. But decides to come back down to California again. Back down to San Francisco, where some capitalists heard about him because of that map making up in BC. And he was commissioned to go to the new hot gold rush country, which was the Mojave Desert. That's how we get to the Mojave Desert. And he became the surveyor of the El Dorado mining district, which was El Dorado Canyon, which is, as I said before, in today's southern Nevada. It was Arizona at the time. So he comes on down. The way you got from San Francisco to LA was again by a steam paddle boat. That's how you did it. And the newspapers were full of 49 come again. Now we're in 1863. And this is the hot story for Southern California, and people came to Southern California for this. By the way, I want to step back, and during this time, you folks in Rosamond live in a municipality with just short of 20,000 people, I think. Well, the population of all of the county of Los Angeles at the same time was 4,300 people. That was it for the entire county. So this is a map that Rudolph DeRuse drew by hand, and it shows his route. This is how he went. He started out in Los Angeles. He actually dropped down to Wilmington down here, which was the seaport for Los Angeles. And he made his way to San Bernardino and back up through Cajon Pass. And he made his way all the way over to, that's where the El Dorado Canyon mining area was. And this will come up too, Fort Mojave. Now the year, keep in mind, 1863. Southern California was basically sympathetic to the South during the Civil War, overwhelmingly. And so there was a fort built out here, Fort Mojave, built in 1859 because there was unrest with the Indian population. And after a minor battle, it became peaceful. The war started, and the Army said, we need you back in LA because we don't trust the local population. Anybody want to stagger a guess as to what they're looking at here? That is the first photograph ever taken. 1826. We're going to tie in photography with this story now. After computer enhancement, looks like that. Now the exposure was so long, at least 8 hours long, that you see sunlight hitting this wall and sunlight hitting this wall. That's how long the exposure was. It was just an all-day thing. This is 1839 in Paris. My guy Rudolph had nothing to do with this. Predates him. But what this means by having a shoe shiner and his customer, this is the very first photograph capturing human beings. 1839. Now that's how new this whole process was. Now we're just heading into the 1860s, and this was the technology for Rudolph Deroux, a glass plate negative. Obviously very breakable. And it was an arduous task to actually take a picture because it was a technology called wet plate photography. And by wet plate, there's the camera. That's a photographer and his wife/assistant. I have one of those. Oh, I'm sorry, photographer and brains of the business. That's more like it.
Thank you.
And this is probably similar to the camera that Rudolph had. And what we're seeing down here are the plate holders. And so you'd have to load this in a dark room and then cover it up with that cover, run it out to the camera and take a picture. But what made it even trickier is that it was all while the photosensitive emulsion on the glass plate was wet. Once it dried, it was no good. Couldn't take a picture with it. So you had a very limited amount of time between being in your darkroom, preparing that plate, getting it into the holder, getting it to the camera, which is already pre-set up. You'd have the focus already done. Take a picture, and again, before any of this dries, run it back to the darkroom and process it. That's what taking a picture was in 1863. No iPhones yet. It was so difficult. And here's the first shot. This is by Rudolph Deroux. And this is the Quartermaster's Depot at Drum Barracks in Wilmington. And it's, there's still some bits of Drum Barracks left. It's part of the Banning House down there, the Banning Museum. And one real interesting thing is, you see Mr. Horsey here, but what's this? It is the only photograph we have of an animal from the Army Camel Corps. And Rudolph Deroux took that picture in 1863. Here is San Bernardino. San Bernardino Mountains in the background, the town in the foreground. This is 1863, so this is 12 years after the founding of San Bernardino, founded by Mormons. But before Rudolph got here, that Brigham Young called back the followers. He needed people, he needed population in Utah to make statehood possible. 80% of the Mormons said, yes, sir, we're coming back. And 20% said, we're staying. We put too much into this place. But there was a fire sale for properties. It became a real bargain. But what ended up happening is the town just got run down at that point. So we're referring back to Rudolph's map. We did the San Bernardino, and now we're going to go through the Cajon Pass. And when you get to this area, Victorville is here, and Adelanto is right here. Today's Adelanto. Here's Cajon Pass. Everybody had to come to a stop. It wasn't heavy traffic. It was the toll keeper. And he had a deal with the government. He kept the pass in good shape, and he was allowed to charge $1 per wagon and 25 cents for a man on horseback. This is called Forks in the Road. I don't know why it's not Fork in the Road, but it's called Forks in the Road. This is the precursor of the interstate interchange of the 15 and the 40 freeways. This was where the Mojave Road split off, well, continued, and the road to Salt Lake continued north. That went north. That branched off to the north. And keep in mind, in those days, as soon as you left Los Angeles, all of it was considered the Mojave Road. It was referred to as the Mojave Road. It wasn't like, no, just after you got through the Cajon Pass. All the way from LA. In fact, people even considered that the road continued all the way back to Wilmington at the ocean. So as we're continuing on the trip here, that's Fork of Roads. And we're going to go through Camp Katy. See, there's the Great Salt Lake Road going up here, but we're heading this way. Camp Katy, 1863. Military outpost. Again, to quell any Indian uprisings. Do you notice anything missing? This is a military installation. No soldiers. No soldiers. Why? They're in LA protecting the metropolis of LA. And I wouldn't be surprised if that was Rudolph's wagon, and he came with, there's a fellow here standing on the top, and there's a guy hunched down here with the tree behind him. This is Soda Springs. Must have been warming up because somebody tossed their jacket off. And Soda Springs was a very interesting, odd place because of the following story here. Now, this is in the San Francisco Bulletin from July 31st, 1863. As we neared Soda Springs, which was in full view at that distance, we had presented to our vision a most beautiful city lying on the left of the springs. There we could see a long line of flat-roofed, turreted houses with their circular and Gothic doors and windows, long ranges of columns, dilapidated fortifications, streets showing plenty between the houses, a long row of clothing or hides hanging upon poles or lines. Away off to the right and the left of the city, suburbs were plainly visible, showing the houses and outhouses nearly covered with trees and vines. All along, in the front of the city, lay shipping and boats. The shadows of the trees, houses, boats, and now and then a half-submerged rock appeared plainly and beautifully in the calm, unruffled, and beautiful sheet of water lying spread out before us. The rest of our company rushed on to the water. I took my time and enjoyed the various changes in the city spread before us. It was one of the most complete deceptions I ever witnessed. As I came nearer to the apparent city, it wasted into thin air, such is life. That's how fantastic a mirage this place was capable of. This is Marl Springs. Water. This is the crucial element in traveling across the desert is water. The reason the Mojave Road was a success is because water was available in the form of springs like every 30 miles. So that was 2 days of travel. Stocked up water for one day, you know you're going to hit water on the second day. Here we are at Rock Spring. These gentlemen are workers and executives and managers for a company called the Philadelphia Company. And they were out there just like Rudolph trying to find gold and riches. Very popular destination. But I don't know what happened to these guys with this company, but they ended up going into petroleum instead of mining. And that's a closer view of the water. Doesn't look terribly yummy to me. And I like the rusted out bucket here. You got a little hole in the corner. Oh, and so if you were to walk up to the top of these rocks and point your camera down, this is the view you would have. And these, in the background, those are the New York mountains. They used to be called the Providence Mountains. Today, New York mountains. And it looks so desolate. But if you get a close-up of what's in the foreground, you can see wagons, parts of wagons, and a very typical of the area, a structure, a building, which is basically canvas over dry stacked rocks. Now, again, remember how difficult it was to take a picture, which means Rudolph de Roos had to use his wagon as a darkroom and with a wet emulsion, get that glass plate nice and wet, stick it in his film holder, and run up that mountain top to the camera which he already had set up there, take a picture, and run down those rocks and process that film. Here's a still life that he did along the Mojave Road. Now we're entering El Dorado. This is El Dorado Canyon. That is, let's go back. That is Pilot Rock, and it was used as a landmark when you're in that canyon because everything looked kind of the same. There was no distinguishing trees or anything to use as guideposts. That was your benchmark. These three happy guys are at the mouth of the Tachatacup mine in El Dorado Canyon. This mine was discovered or exploited in 1861. So this was 2 years old by the time Rudolph got there to take the picture. And this mine was so successful, it was producing until 1942. In El Dorado Canyon, you would have miners' camps. And being that it was a Civil War, the miners' camps were separated. Secessionists, Unionists. This is a secessionist camp here. And this is a Unionist camp, and you can see there are fewer people. Take note of the guy back here. He has a saw in his hand and a piece of wood. That's actually a tip as to what his profession is. Here he is with his book on surgery. He was the Fort Mojave surgeon. He was a civilian, but he was a surgeon. And he's with a couple of Paiute Indians here. This is what de Roos was really sent by those capitalists in San Francisco to produce. This was a detailed map, and I have it right here. It'll be great for people to get right up to it and look at it and marvel at the detail in this thing. So he took 3 months to survey this one canyon, produce this map. I have a close-up. Every line you see here is a different mine. There were just hundreds and hundreds of mines in this one canyon. This is a tiny part of that map. The man on the left, John Moss, he's the fellow that started that Tachatacup mine in 1863, but he sold out and made a fortune. He made a fortune. And he is with the chief of the Paiutes, Turcharum. Here's a little R&R for the miners. So we've got poker, and we have cribbage, and we have checkers, all out at one time. And again, look at the quote architecture here. Dry stack rocks, canvas top, made for great lighting for the shot. Another still life, but these are the plants native to El Dorado Canyon. So from El Dorado Canyon, you could come down the river, Colorado River, and go to Fort Mojave on the Arizona side, or you could drop back down towards LA but stop at 2 more districts. But remember, with Fort Mojave, that's Fort Mojave, it's part of Fort Mojave. The building's closest to the river, and there's the Colorado River with California on the far side. When the soldiers were withdrawn from Fort Mojave in 1861, they left one white man there to hold down the fort. His name was William Furlong, and he was there for 2 years and never had a single problem with the Indians. And he maintained the fort, And what happened after 2 years, 1863, around the time that Rudolph was going through? At that time, there was a new military group called the California Volunteers, and they would fill in for spaces that the U.S. Army couldn't handle on their own, and they are the ones that end up manning the fort. Now this, I'm breaking away from Rudolph's pictures for a second here. How did you get across that river from California to Arizona? This is how you did it. This shot was taken much later. And what happened to all the ore that you were mining? How are you getting that to civilization? Colorado River. They had many ships like this that would go down to the Gulf of California, around Cabo San Lucas, and up to San Francisco. Back to Rudolph's photographs. Here are some of the more important Indians at Fort Mojave. And this is the commander, Captain Atchison, with the California Volunteers, with his orderly and clerk. And here he is with some local natives, Mojave Indians. Now, almost all of the soldiers, every free moment they had, they went to the mines too and staked claims and did some mining. Everybody wanted to be a part of this. Nobody wanted to have a furlough to go to LA or some other place. They wanted to get to the mines and strike it rich. Back to this, and now Rudolph is now done with El Dorado Canyon, and he wanders over to the Macedonian mining district, where he works for 2 years. And he, as you can see, it's a much smaller operation, but it was very profitable. And he created this map and sent it to, down here, it's for Professor Silliman, Jr. At Yale University, there was a father-son teaching team, Professors Silliman, Jr., Sr. And they were the most important chemists in the burgeoning field of petroleum. But in Professor Silliman Jr.'s time off, he became a consultant for investors coming out from Yale, going into the mining areas, and he met Rudolph at the Macedonian mining district. Rudolph did this map, sent it to him at Yale. And by the way, as successful as Silliman was for petroleum, he was a disaster for all of the investments he steered his customers toward. Now, whoa, what do we have here? Well, Rudolph, while he was at the Macedonian district, there was a call by Louis Napoleon, Emperor Napoleon III in France, in 1864. And it was going to be the biggest science and industry exposition in history, in the world, ever. And this is what he ordered to be built in Paris. And Rudolph answered the call to send a specimen of silver from his Macedonian mining district, and it was put on display at this event. So Rudolph leaves Macedonian mining district, and he decides he's going to work for the California Geological Survey. But he kept starting a project and couldn't finish a project. Kept starting a project and couldn't finish the project. And he was in, where would he have been? The greatest place on earth, Kern County. And he settled in Havilah. And he took 2 photographs of Havilah, and it's doubtful whether this is one of the 2. We don't know. We have no way of knowing what those photos were. They did not survive. This is probably in the 1870 to 1890, this shot here. And Rudolph had a deal with Kramer's Hardware in town to sell lithographs of his 2 photographs for $1. After Rudolph did his bit in Kern County, he went back to the State Geological Survey and said, I want to try it again, but I need help. I can't just do this on my own. So the state gave him 2 assistants. Now he could go off and do the job that he always wanted to do. But they gave him an area of the eastern Sierras all the way from Mono Lake to Tehachapi. In the 1860s, you got to cover a lot of ground. But he completed his job, and he discovered 2 groves of tule trees that was, to that point, unknown to white people. And so when J.D. Whitney, the state geologist, published this book, Yosemite Guidebook, he included a big thank you to calling out Rudolph DeRuse for discovering these 2 groves of trees. While he was doing that survey, unbeknownst to him, a patent application he had mailed into the government had been approved. Now, DeRuse air treatment, what the heck is this? It was a way to speed up the fermentation of wine, and wine was becoming a new big industry in California. And what the odd thing here is, why the heck, what's with the address? Because by this time, he had left California and had gone back to New York City. This was the first of 21 patents that he ended up holding. And like I said, he's back in New York City, where in 1896, at the age of 73, he took a fall in Yonkers, New York, just north of the city, and he cracked his skull. Lived on for 3 days at the Yonkers hospital, but he passed away. While he was in New York, he belonged to a new society. It was a cremation society. Cremations were a new thing. And of course, there was a huge backlash. Most Americans thought that was, an abomination to burn a body. But that's what ended up happening with him. He was cremated. Now his photographs. His photographs took quite a wild ride as far as who they ended up with. Too much detail there. It's in the book. Excuse me. But in 1942, the Museum of Modern Art in New York decided to put on a show, the photographs of the Civil War and the American frontier. Who was the curator of that show? Some guy by the name of Ansel Adams. 1942. And so in that show, they were showing Curtis, Matthew Brady, Timothy O'Sullivan, all the absolute greatest names, and included in this show 5 prints by Rudolph DeRuse. And this is the book that I have here, and it entails all of the photographs known to exist for Rudolph DeRuse and the whole story of him, the trip, and what life was like in 1863. And I thank you very much.
Can you tell us what happened to the prince?
Jeff, what happened to the prince?
To the prince. Okay. He didn't think much of the prince. He never took any commercial advantage of any of these photographs. I don't even know if the capitalists in San Francisco ever saw them, because they wanted that map. That's what they wanted. So there was an assistant to Whitney who did that book for the California Geological. He ran the Geological Survey. He had an assistant named Brewer. Brewer ended up becoming a professor at Yale also with Stillman Jr. And Brewer knew about DeRuse because of the intersection with the Geological Survey. And he had heard that, he hadn't met Rudolph, but he had heard there are these photographs. So he searched like heck to find Rudolph DeRuse. Unbeknownst to them, one was in New Haven, Connecticut, one was in New York City. They were so close. But after Brewer kept nagging Whitney, hey, where is this guy? They finally got together in the form of writing letters. and DeRue sent to Brewer 44 prints. 3 of them are duplicates of other images, so there are 41 unique images that went to Brewer, which then went into a collector's, the Brewer papers went into the collection of a private person, and then he ended up donating them to Berkeley, to University of California at Berkeley. But there were more fantastic prints, again, of only the 41 scenes, and that ended up in the Horace Mann Jr. collection, which in turn ended up at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. So between those two places, I pulled together, the best of each place to present, the best possible rendition. And there is so much Photoshop work done on that, but Photoshop to maintain the original integrity of the pictures. There is nothing screwball, flashy, about the Photoshop work. It was to just repair what damages in the prints. Sometimes the prints were literally taped to something, and so you had tape residue, and I was able to have people take the residue out, and you could see what was behind it through Photoshop. Amazing. So, and the prints are only like 3.5 by 4.5 inches. They had no enlargers in those days. You can blow anything up. Whatever size print you wanted, that's the negative you shot in the camera. And there were cameras, or the picture of the Golden Spike being driven at Promontory Point in Utah? That camera had a negative that was 6 feet across. It was put together for the sole purpose of taking that one shot, and it was destroyed after that. I mean, we couldn't do anything with it. It was too huge and big, bulky thing. So it was very common for the top photographers to shoot with view cameras that had negatives 14 by 17 inches. I mean, you just can't find any of that stuff now. But Curtis, when he shot the Indians in the Northwest, he used 11 by 14, 14 by 17, 8 by 10. And today, 8 by 10 is the limit, and with digital, that's dead too. So, yeah.
And then what did they do with the plates?
The plates, have no idea what ever happened to the plates. My guess is Rudolph DeRuse is tired of California. He says, I'm going back home to New York. Paper prints weigh a whole lot less than glass plates. Very sad story about glass plate negatives in general, and that is 80% of all pictures taken during the Civil War on these glass plates. Those plates were then used for greenhouse glass for people to make, and the sun would bleach out the images. So 80% are lost forever. It reminds me of silent movies. 90% of all silent movies are lost forever because nobody cared. In those days, it was the studio would send prints out, and they didn't care if they ever got them back. As long as they got the money for the box office, they didn't care about the prints. Yeah.
Jeff,
Hi.
In the Havla Weekly Courier.
Yes.
And he called the two shots of the town, one on the north side, one on the south side,
Right.
lithographs. He did not use the word photograph.
Yeah, but the photographs were used to create the you had in those days, okay, what we call halftone printing, which is the modern way to take a black and white image and make a bunch of little dots, and then you have ink on paper, and that's how the newspapers are done, and that's how any kind of a publication is done. We're talking black and white only. That only came about in the late 1890s. Before that, someone would have to actually do a wood etching based on the photograph, and it was a wood etching that was reproduced. And it's funny, and the Wall Street Journal now is kind of a throwback, because you'll see not photographs with like the author's picture. It's just like a wood engraving, and they hung on to that, nostalgia. I don't know what it is, but that was photography reproduction. Was not as we think of it. They're etching. They were just etchings with lines. Yeah.
So the Havala lithographs would look like that.
Yeah. So the Havala lithographs are probably 2 pictures on a single piece of paper that he charged $1 for. And what happened to the photos? Who knows? And plus, and also, don't forget, glass plate negatives are fragile. They could have all broken. Maybe he made an attempt to ship them to New York, and they all, he ended up with a trunk of broken glass. Don't know.
Any more questions?
No. Greg?
Whoops, Gretchen, if you can once again.
What do you want me to?
Oh, no. Well, one last thing is, you can come up here and take a look at the map of the Mojave Road, the way DeRuse went, and the way the interstates are now. And again, this is the map DeRuse made of El Dorado Canyon, and you can look at the excruciating detail on the thing. I mean, every building is indicated on here, everything.
Okay, next month we're going to have Bob Alvis come and speak on trains, and he has a program, oh goodness gracious, that goes from Mojave up through Boron and that direction. Goodness gracious, I should have paid better attention. But anyway, it's Bob Alvis, it's like, saying the rock star is coming. But he's got 2 names. But thank you so much, Jeff. This has just been delightful. And once again, his book weaves those newspaper articles and that story through those pictures.
Yeah, the book is an immersion into 1863. That's how that was the concept of the book. It's not new history written about it where we whitewash it one way or the other. No, this is how people wrote about their experiences at the time. Yeah.
So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.